Julia Coronado with us of BNP Paribas. As we look at the fiscal cliff, Julia, how do you define a fiscal cliff?
Well, there's a lot of deadlines built into the legislation that's been passed over the last few years. And so we've got a lot of things that are set to expire as of December 31st. And those things add up to about just shy of 3.5% of GDP. So that's a pretty steep cliff.
It's a big, big number. It's a steep cliff. Let's look at the research note from Dr. Coronado. The coming fiscal cliff hasn't been a focus either of the campaigns or the markets. This is likely to change in the second half. What will draw it to our attention? Will it be gamesmanship about the Senate and about politics, or will it be economic data?
I think it's going to be both. And the fact that these things will come into focus, the closer we get to these deadlines, the larger they loom over the economy. And then as the closer we get to the election and the more gamesmanship we see on both sides of the aisle around these issues, will definitely bring it into focus. So the volume on the politics is going to go up steadily from here on out.
The rationalization is we're not Spain, we're not Greece. We can handle a fiscal change of 3% of GDP. We're a $15 trillion economy. Do you buy that rationalization?
No, and in fact, I don't think we're going to end up seeing bearing the brunt of that full 3.5%. I think what we're going to see is some legislation passed to push that off, and that will ease the immediate hit from these different tax and spending provisions. But that said, I mean, we're looking at a lame duck Congress between November and December. Nothing gets done before November. Then we have a lame duck Congress. We're probably going to get a lot of piecemeal, temporary push forwards.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that, you know, investors hate, the S&P hates. It's going to feel, again, like the U.S. government just can't get its act together.
Okay, let's look at this government getting its act together. We showed this up at the primary debate in Hanover. It's an elegant chart. Beware fiscal cliff ahead. And you can just see the widening out going back to 1955. Pull this into your previous call of negative GDP and now an outright caution on the American economy. How does this fiscal cliff overlay with first half economic growth?
Well, no matter what gets legislated, we are going to see a fiscal tightening that's pretty noticeable. First, it should be noted that we are already going to see a fiscal tightening this year. So there is, if you look through all the spending bills, what is scheduled to take place is a reduction in federal spending that's pretty noticeable. So we're going to be feeling it already this year. And then I think when we hit that first half of 2013, it just intensifies. There will be an increase in tax liabilities of some magnitude. There will be a further reduction in spending. So,
right.
I mean, to be fair, when you put massive stimulus into an economy to get us through a crisis, eventually we do have to pay the bill, and that comes at the expense of growth down the road. So part of the deal we struck was we'll get out of this mess, but we're going to have slower growth going forward because we have to pay it off.
What is your 2012 GDP call, real GDP?
So basically right around 2 to 2.5 where we are in 2012. We expect that for 2012, and we expect that for 2013 as well.
What do the relative optimists get wrong? When you hear other shops talk about 3%, the consumer will be there, incomes will be there. Not great, but fine. What do they get wrong?
Well, I think we will see consumers doing a little bit better, but it's going to be more from the labor market and less from, say, stimulus measures. So you're going to get more in the way of jobs and labor income, but you're going to have to pay some of that back through taxes. And so that's going to keep the pickup to be relatively muted. So we're going to get more private sector, but less public sector. There's going to be a rotation. And on balance, I think consumers are still cautious. They are fundamentally changed, and they behave differently.
Right.
So when they see these taxes, they take them into consideration.
And then, of course, yesterday, Stephen Roach, we had him for an entire half hour. He retired from Morgan Stanley, and he agrees with Dr. Coronado. The consumer inflation adjusted is pretty fragile. This is a big, big debate among economics. Here's another debate in the housing market. Ian Shepherdson bringing this to my attention this morning, a false dawn. Mortgage purchase applications, okay, they're up, but boy, are they range bound from that distortion of a year and a half ago. Julia, are we going to get help from the housing market?
Well, that's one of the things we worry about that we've been seeing lately. There's been a lot of optimism around some better housing numbers. I think one of the things we worry about is that this record warm winter pulled forward some activity at the expense of the spring selling season. So you have some observers that are just extrapolating forward from this data saying, oh, that means the spring selling season is going to be that much better. I'm not really sure. We don't see a lot of, as you note, the mortgage applications aren't picking up. There's a lot of fundamental reasons why housing demand shouldn't be that great. So we might actually see a dip in Q2 instead of a pickup.
8 days away from the jobs report, folks. I'll have special broadcast Good Friday. Bloomberg Radio will be here for you for that jobs report. Julia Coronado, how does this March employment picture shape up?
Right now we're expecting a 200K on non-farm payroll, so that's another slight step down. So we saw job growth moderate to just 227 in February. We think we'll get another moderation in March. It's still a pretty good number, but you know, we had again a lot of these seasonal issues make the warm winter putting off layoffs, and I think that means at the expense of spring hiring. So we'll see some somewhat more subdued numbers in the spring, and I do think we are starting to see a turnaround in the participation rate. We expect a modest uptick in the participation rate, which will leave the unemployment rate steady at 8.3.